They said they wanted power.
Oh, awesome.
Zaba, Zakalush, Kalamatskalo.
Welcome to Guru Talks.
Guru? What do they do, like levitate and chill on mountaintops?
Not exactly, but you are in the right place to find out everything you need to know, and it's actually quite simple. I am your host, Florian Boschi, and I will be going extra deep with Guru Bhaneswaranand each and every show. We are covering deep truths about relationships, success in business, world peace, and many other topics. Oh, and of course, enlightenment. Because our Guru, well, he is enlightened. Okay, this is the 7th episode of Guru Talks. Welcome, everybody. Today we have a special guest. Her name is Elika Lord. She is a therapist from Melbourne, Australia. Welcome, Elika.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely, you're welcome. It's an honor to have you. Also, Guru Bhaneswaranand is here, I believe. Guru Bhaneswaranand, are you here?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you so much.
Very much welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We had a couple of episodes ago. We were discussing the topic of past life regressions and regressions into childhood and regressions into the womb. And Guru Bhaneswaranand was explaining that there are certain dangers that can come with such regressions and that the benefits are questionable. He asked back then to bring somebody on board onto the show who is an expert in regression therapy. And Elika Lord was so nice. She's an expert. She has had many years of regression therapy on her back. She has treated many thousands of patients with different forms of transpersonal psychology and regression work. Elika, would you mind sharing a little bit about your career as a therapist? What is it that you do?
Yeah, thank you very much. So, as you said, my label in Western society would be a transpersonal psychologist. And I've had my own private practice in this field for the past 8 years. And I've been a client in this type of work for the past 17 years. And in the past 5 years, I found myself in a yogic community in Thailand. And I folded in yogic psychology to my work as well. So it gave it the extra Eastern wisdom tradition layer to the work. And that marriage of the two really started to open things up. So in terms of the regression work, there are two categories of regression work that we would consider in Western psychology, and one of those would be past life regression work, so specifically looking into past lives using the technology of hypnotherapy or hypnosis, and the other is age regression. So this is not necessarily going back into a previous life, but it's looking into how our early developmental years in this life have had an effect on us. I largely, in the early part of my career, was working with age regression therapy. And what I discovered was that as I was working with people into the deeper layers of why they had formed particular patterns and why their ego was structured in a particular way, sometimes what would happen is they would drop into a past life and there would be something that had happened in that past life that was trying to come through or had followed through into this life, seeking some type of resolution. So yeah, my initial inquiry was not into past life regression, but it ended up being part of what I do.
just because it naturally came about because there was an energy in your patients that wanted or needed to be processed in some way, I assume, yes?
That's correct. So it wasn't prompted, it wasn't specifically asked for. It tends to emerge spontaneously in the inquiry, yes.
I'm not sure if you have spent time with this aspect, but in terms of regression therapy, do you know, has there been any research done in the field? Can you share a little bit about what's the standing as of now?
Well, regression therapy actually, and we're talking about age regression therapy now,
Okay.
that has its roots in Freud's work, in Sigmund Freud's work, who was the pioneer of psychology in Western society. And this started out with the concept of making what is unconscious conscious. And a lot of his ideas about how to do that then found their way into what we would now call regression work or regression therapy. In terms of the evidence, up until recently, I would say that the evidence has been quite questionable. And there have been issues, particularly with things like hypnotherapy, because you may have heard of false memory becoming an issue. False memory syndrome was becoming an issue. What was happening was people were having, it was mostly through hypnotherapy work, perhaps a seed of an idea or something was planted, so it is claimed, that then created a false memory within the client. So there have been issues around that were later then taken into court cases, saying that, you know, this type of regression work is inconclusive and it can be dangerous and it can plant false memories. And after having a lot of experience in the field, I do understand how that could have happened. But a new development in Western psychotherapy has actually occurred very recently. The type of work that I do, the model that I use, is a model pioneered by an American psychologist. His name is Richard Schwartz, and he pioneered a therapy called internal family systems therapy. And in this model, which I'll go into a little later in the interview as to how it works and how it's relevant to our discussion, what they've found is they've now awarded the approach sort of evidence-based certification and accreditation. So after researching and monitoring and observing many client studies during the work and in the follow-up 12 months later, the process is proving itself to be effective across a range of issues. And what's interesting about this particular work is, even though they don't specifically say we are a regression-based modality, it is primarily a age regression-based modality. And that's a very cutting-edge development in Western psychology at the moment.
Okay, would you mind sharing a little bit more about that specific kind of therapy? Just so we know how it works. Internal family system interview, you called it, yes?
Yeah, so it's short. It's IFS, and that's short for internal family systems. And this is considered a transpersonal psychology in the sense that it works outside of the ego. And the way it does that is it engages the self. And the self, we would, this is analogous, or this is equal to what, you know, perhaps the Buddhist traditions would call the no self. So the self is actually engaged in the therapy. And the way that they view the subconscious mind is made up of a few layers. And the first layer is what they would call the protective mechanisms. They also call them protectors. So to simplify that, what that would mean, and Guruji will understand me when I say this, all of those protectors inside are almost like discrete little eyes, discrete little personalities inside of the person that the person becomes identified with. So I might have a little I, a little subpersonality that manifests as, let's say, workaholism. And what the therapy does is it disidentifies the person from that particular personality, from that identification. And it does it through mindfulness. The mindfulness is the practice. So the first thing is to become aware that that workaholic is what they would call a part of you. It's not who you really are. And so in this separation, in this disidentification process, the person starts to realize, as they continually disidentify from all of these different aspects of the ego, that's not me, that's not me, that's not me.
But let me just cut you off here for a moment. So, but you have to experience those parts in some way or form, I believe, emotionally, on an emotional level. Or how does this work?
Yeah, so what they would do if you were in a session, let's say, you would start with the therapist by sitting and breathing and just practicing becoming present, embodied. So you might do some deep breathing, you might notice what's happening around you, disengaging with the story, becoming present to the moment, noticing what you can feel, what you can touch. And then the therapist would maybe ask you if there was something you were interested in exploring. And you could say, you know, I just can't stop working. You know, if you wanted to work with this workaholic part, it takes me over and I'm not able to stay present. I become this workaholic. And then it's largely eyes closed work. So we're not just sitting talking to the therapist. We actually go inside and we start to feel the way that this subpersonality, this identification shows up. And maybe we would feel very stressed and contracted in the body. We would notice contraction. We would notice that it has a certain voice, it has a certain way of thinking, it has a certain way of walking and engaging in the world. And we would start to notice all of the ways that this particular part of our ego shows up and takes over. And we'd start to notice what makes that part take over. What are the situations that catalyzes that part into taking over? And simply by this simple act of disidentification, we're starting to create some space. We're starting to feel the self behind the part, behind the ego. And then we engage the part. And a lot of the time, the part, let's say this workaholic part of us, has no awareness of the self. It has no awareness that you're there. So we would make that connection. Does this workaholic part know that you're here with it right now? And that simple act of connection with the ego, between the self and the ego, starts to transform this relationship, and we start to work it from there. Okay.
And we start understanding that this is not us.
Correct. That's right.
That's the disidentification, so to say, when in the beginning you're actually searching for an identification, you're exploring that emotional package, yes?
Yes. Yes. And so we start to see that there are many, many little I's, many, many parts of the identity that are running around doing their thing, dragging us along with it, and they're formed for a particular reason. And this is where the regression therapy begins.
Like, for example, as a protection mechanism to not see something or experience something, or yes?
Protectors normally form around a more vulnerable part of the psyche that has been affected earlier in the person's life.
So, Bhaneswaranand, do you see this as part of the regression that you were talking about 2 episodes ago? What do you think about all this?
It's good. Whatever she is talking makes sense. When we go further, as she explains what is happening inside, then maybe we are able to realize that it is good or bad to take a person in the past.
I'm not sure I understand. So, is what she's explaining falls under the category of regression from your perspective, yes? Okay.
Yes.
And you're saying again, please, can you repeat what you were saying in different words?
I'm saying whatever she is doing till now, whatever she has explained, it's okay. Now, what the results on the person are, what we are able to achieve out of it, when we talk, we will be able to understand a little better whether it is useful for the humankind or it is not useful to the human beings.
Okay, I mean, you were categorically saying that it is not useful for the human being 2 episodes ago.
Yes, I still say, but I have also said to you that in case there are some point of views, like she is saying, we must hear to them, and and then we together decide what is right and what is wrong.
Yeah, so now that you heard a little bit about her, what do you think is the mistake in logic in this whole model?
As I have said you earlier, whenever we are going in the past, there are few things which a person has forget, and there is a reason why nature has given us capacity to forget the things, so that our life should become peaceful, should become nice. And when we go and remember all those things, it may disturb us. That is what I think I have categorically said the other day, and I am saying the same today.
Okay, okay. Elika, please.
Yes, yes. So I completely understand what Guruji is saying. And if I can finish explaining the rest of the model, and maybe he could respond more about the rest of it, if that would be okay.
Yes, yes, yes.
So we are exploring from the place of the self or the no self. And in normal, or the way regression therapy used to be done before this new type of work started with the self involved, the way that a person would regress is they would go back into the memory, or they would go back into the very wounded experience, the thing that they have forgotten, and they would experience that again. And this could cause distress. This could cause re-traumatization. Yeah. And so from this understanding, I understand, Guruji, this can be damaging.
Yes.
Yes. But what has changed is that when we revisit from the self, and we have practiced with mindfulness being disidentified from the part, from the experience, We can witness the experience from the place of awareness, presence, detachment, and compassion, the qualities of the self. And we can see, and the self, by bringing the self and presence into contact with that experience, the self can heal this experience without the person now becoming the experience again. So there remains some separation, and the person remains out of the ego when the process is done.
So you're saying, Elika, that there is no emotional involvement as we're going back or as we're experiencing.
Yeah, what I'm saying is there will certainly be emotion. As a matter of fact, when we really see the things with clarity that we've gone through, we might feel grief, we might feel sad at the level of abandonment or betrayal. We have abandoned ourselves, we've betrayed ourselves, we've let go of our essence, and we've become ego, and that's a self-betrayal. And this could cause sadness and grief when we come into contact with this. But this is very different to being identified with the part that went through that experience, that went through the trauma. Very different experience.
Can you explain this a little bit more in detail? Because from where I stand, the moment somebody has an emotional involvement with an experience of their past, which means they're re-experiencing grief or they're experiencing grief about something that happened, they are not disidentified in that moment. They are in fact identifying in that very moment.
Yes, this is true. And when you are fully in the self, there is still compassion and loving kindness towards the ego for what the ego has gone through.
So you get the patient into a state where they experience what they're experiencing, but at the same time, you urge them to feel compassionate towards themselves, to not judge themselves. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm just trying to summarize what you're saying.
Yes, so learning about the self is part of the journey, is part of the therapeutic journey. And the work simplifies it somewhat. I won't say that it's got it all worked out. I would say that the spiritual traditions understand the different ways that essence manifests far greater, with far greater discernment than Western psychology does still. However, Western psychology is starting to work out, okay, so we have this essence, we have Jivatman, or we have the self, and what are some of the qualities we notice about this? We notice that there is compassion, we notice that there is detachment, we notice there is presence, we notice there is space, there's no mind, the mind is space. As a person goes through their therapeutic journey, they start to notice the qualities of the self, being compassion and presence and space in the mind, and all of these other qualities of the self. And if the person progresses the journey long enough, it no longer is a therapeutic journey, it has become a spiritual journey. So it starts as a therapeutic journey, but then as the person cultivates more and more self, they start to realize they're on a much bigger journey. And that journey is away from the egoic self. And eventually it moves from, I am a person having all of these experiences, to I am the experience. I am essence. It is coming from me. I'm not having it. I am it. And that is the transition point into the spiritual experience.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you so much. Guruji, can you comment on this in terms of I'm not sure if we're using the same definitions, so I would like for us to kind of like get to the same base, so to say. So first of all, do you understand what Elika is saying here in terms of the self, the egoic self, the non-egoic self, and how do you see this?
Look, whatever way we are able to do, maybe psychological way, maybe spiritual way, the idea what Elika says is very right, that we want to reach to a position where ego does not matter, where I does not matter. And that is what spirituality is. If we are able to start psychologically and are really able to reach there, there is absolutely no problem. But on this path, what my experience is, that when you are taking people in the past, instead of losing this eyes, they identify with those things which God has made us forget, and if they come into that, then they get traumatized.
And there is even a term, right, in transpersonal psychology and in regression therapy. It's called re-traumatization, and it has been a phenomenon in this kind of work that I believe has been researched, and there have been new findings around this. And I think maybe you can explain more, but from what I understand with my little research that I did is that to avoid the re-traumatization, the newer methods are not deeply regressing, they're just edging on it, so to say. Is that correct?
Yes, this is absolutely correct. So, step one is for the person to have a lot of self capacity. And this means that disidentification, a lot of mindfulness practice, and a lot of disidentification has already occurred, because the psyche is quite amazing. It's quite genius. As Guruji is pointing to, there is strong forgetting. There is strong putting it away, not to be seen again. And unless the person really knows that they are not the ego and can approach the situation with this detachment, with this clarity, the subconscious mind will not allow it to happen. It will not allow the person to see the trauma. It will not allow the person to go there. So what we've noticed over time is that the more the person has the self in the seed of consciousness, and it's called titration, when they very, very slowly touch the trauma little bit by little bit, eventually the subconscious mind trusts that the self is here and that the self can do this, and it will open to the self. But this is very difficult work, and it must be done by the self. It cannot be done by the ego.
Okay. Go, Bhaneswaranand, two questions really, but let's start with one. What do you think is the chance of a person that is maybe on a spiritual path, maybe not, to be not in their egoic self as they're in the process of moving forwards in their life, or of learning, or of becoming, transforming or transcending into a more healed, or into a better version of ourselves, into a more healed version of ourselves? What is the chance for us to not be in our egoic mind and not identifying with whatever trauma we're going back to? What do you think?
Yeah, first of all, I agree with her totally. If ego is not there, the damage will not be there.
Yes. And I think you said this just very quickly. You said this in the last session also. You said once a person is in deep spirituality, those were the terms you used, it is no problem to deal with their emotional body. It is actually part of the work, you said. Yes, am I getting this right?
You are right. You are
Yes,
right.
please continue.
Now you can call her spiritual, you can call her psychological. Most of the psychologists are little spiritual, and most of the spiritual people are a little psychologist. So yes, you can say she is two in one. And if you can take a patient remove ego, I think even if you are able to remove ego, there your purpose is solved. Even if you do not take into past life things, the moment ego is removed, most of the problems of a person's are automatically treated. And then it does not matter to this person wherever you take him. But the chances are very high at the same time that if the ego remains, then as I have said in the past episode, that damages will be there. How much, that has to be quantified by science or by psychologists, but the damages cannot be zero.
Okay. What I would suggest is maybe before we continue, maybe we can, from both your sides, define what spirituality means and what the ego means. So just to get a little bit of a background in your philosophical standing, how you look at things, how you look at the whole system.
So, it's very difficult to use words when you are beyond the mind. It's very difficult to be anything other than present and with the next moment and the next moment and the next moment, because nothing else is actually real. So then the best that we can do is use words and use concepts and try and point to what we're experiencing or what we are, right? So I'm talking about beyond the mind. If we bring it down from these spaces of the absolute, of the void, of space, of presence, of love, of awareness, into the realm of ideas and concepts and language, because that's what we use as human beings, then we have these ways of talking and pointing and models and structures. But I would like to say that I work with all of that, knowing that that is also ephemeral, that those are just words, they're just concepts. They're helpful, but reality is all that's real. And so if I start to use words and concepts, the view is one of totality, of a non-hierarchical view. And I could sum it up by saying that the Buddha is you, the Buddha is Guruji, the Buddha is me, the Buddha is my mother, the Buddha is my plant. The Buddha is everything. And nothing is better. There are no preferences. There is no this is good and this is bad, and I would prefer to have this and I would prefer to have that, and I want to change this or make this different. Everything is just happening as it is in the moment, flashing in and out of the moment. So this is my experience of reality, and it's from this view of totality, this non-hierarchical view, that I then attempt to work with people with these psychological models to help them, first of all, realize they're not the me, the I, the little I's, to help this process of identification. And as they start to walk that journey, they start to drop into more presence, because the reasons that they couldn't be present, because presence is who you actually are. It's not even about being present. You are presence. And the moment that you're not present, The moment you are not presence, you're out of yourself. So I help people come back to their presence. And they experiencing themselves as essence. And when I say I, it's not even me who's doing that. So in this journey, you surrender not just the I, but the I that anything is being done to or doing, or you're being done. And this is the viewpoint that I'm walking with.
So would you say, Elika, before we go to Guru Bhaneswaranand, would you say that the definition of spirituality is the walk on this path of becoming more present in the now?
It's about disidentification, it's about healing, and it's about becoming who you are and who you've always been.
And disidentification and healing is an equivalent.
That's the psychotherapeutic part of the journey.
Okay. So
at first, you are an ego with wounds, experiencing the world as separate to you. That's where you start. And when you finish, you are the world. You are existence, you are non-existence, you are neither, you are the whole thing.
Okay. So the psychotherapeutic process and the spiritual growth process is in essence the same thing from what you're describing.
Yes, so when I talk about essence, I'm talking about non-dual states of being.
Okay.
And this could be strength, this could be power, this could be peace, it could be joy or space. When who we are is not these little personalities. I am love, I am joy, I am the fragrance. The essence has many fragrances, and I am all of those. And I can manifest them more or less fully depending on my connection, depending on how clear I am with that manifestation.
Okay, thank you. That sounds great. Guru Bhaneswaranand, I believe your definition of spirituality, from what I've heard you talk in the past, is quite similar to this, or...
Yes, I admire your words. You are very soft and spoken nice things. You are right. It is difficult to express spirituality in words. It is beyond words. It can only be experienced and cannot be talked about. Closer to what probably we can say is spirituality is the capacity to live without duality. It is a state of zero where good and bad does not exist, where duality does not exist.
Thank you, Guruji.
Welcome.
So Guruji, what would be your alternative to regression therapy, to going back into a trauma, to going back into, how did you call the other kind of regression therapy where it's just going into childhood experiences? Age regression therapy, yes. So what would be your alternative solution, Guru Bhaneswaranand? Because it seems like you are agreeing that there might be some use towards it, but in an overall sense, it seems like you, and we have talked about this a little bit last time, but it seems like you have what you believe is maybe a more effective way of dealing with our egoic mind, so to say. You think this is the right way to call it?
Look, see, if you have heard her things very deep and between the lines, she was very clear in saying that first I try to remove the ego from the patient.
Yes.
That big I to make it a small I or make it zero. See, whatever way you do, it's a spirituality. And the moment you do it, nothing else is needed. Then, if nothing else is needed, then going back and going forth does not matter. But to all those patients or whatever you call it, person, where you are not able to reduce that I still have an opinion that we should not be allowed to take them in the past. And I think she completely agrees with me. We are on the same platform.
Yes, it makes sense. I can see that as well. You're basically saying, Elika, that there is a certain point where a patient is ready to move outside of her or his egoic mind enough to see what happened in the past from a disassociated place, and then it is the right thing. Otherwise, it will just re-traumatize them. Is that correct, how I summarized your last half hour?
Yes, I wouldn't use the word dissociated. I'd use disidentified. Yeah, because we don't want them to be dissociated. That's a trauma response.
My bad.
No, that's all good. I just wanted to clarify that. But yes, I would agree that regressing without having the self present could be more damaging than positive. So if your psychology does not have the self present, it actually becomes futile because it is only the ego acting upon the ego. To have an effective psychology, the self must be present to the ego because the self is the only true healer. And the self, with its presence, by touching the ego, can heal it, can bring it home to a place of peace, of healing. The ego cannot do that.
What comes up for me here is maybe a deeper aspect of this being enlightened. What I have learned from Guru Bhaneswaranand is that a truly disidentified mind from the ego is only a mind that has reached full self-realization, or purnatva, or you could say, enlightenment, or call it whatever you want. But isn't this a concern here, that you're going into a state of regressing with the risk of re-traumatizing, under the condition that the person is free enough of their egoic mind to be able to disidentify with what has been given? On the other hand, we do understand that nobody who hasn't reached this very elusive and probably quite difficult state to achieve, meaning purnatva or self-realization, will still always be in their egoic mind. Please, and I would like to hear comments from both of you on this.
Just to clarify, so if you recall, I said that the subconscious mind is very clever. It won't show the trauma or the wounding unless it thinks the self is present. It knows if it's just the ego, right? So you can't fake it inside. You can't pretend to be the self. The subconscious mind knows. So if I'm working with a very vulnerable, let's say I'm working with a traumatized part of myself that went through a difficult experience. If I show up and I'm just an imposter and I'm like, I'm here to take care of you and, you're safe now, that traumatized part of the psyche will be able to smoke me out and say, you're not the self. You're a part, you're a protector, you're the ego. So there's no bluffing it with the subconscious. It doesn't work. You have to be the real deal. Otherwise the healing doesn't happen. So it's a very fortuitous, amazing way that the subconscious mind actually works. Yeah, you can't be an imposter. And so the person, and I've seen this in therapeutic sessions so much, people will pretend to be the self. They will have imposters show up, trying to force, trying to fix. It never works because the subconscious mind knows. Only the self can do the healing. Right? So it's kind of a fail-safe mechanism in there.
And the self is the fully not disassociated but disidentified mind, yes?
Yeah, so just a comment on that as well, okay? What I've noticed, and I'm sure this is the experience of most therapists who work in this type of structure, with this model, you don't have to be enlightened to work with it. If you have access to self, and you can access self as a therapist or as a client, you can get some work done. And there is, and I'm sure Guruji will agree with me, not all enlightenment experiences are spontaneous. Yeah, where all of a sudden I see a ray of sunlight and I'm awake. Spontaneous enlightenment is very rare, actually. Most self-realization journeys are a process, and we have a transition phase where sometimes we're in the realized state or we're realized, and then we fall back and we swing. We go back and forth for quite some time as we're working through the remnants of the ego. So it seems to be that as long as a person has access to self, the work can be done. And as more work is done by the client, they get to the tipping point where they've had self-realization experiences, or they've visited states, and then they fall back. But as they do more work, these states of realization can become more stabilized. And I'm sure Guruji, I'm ask him to clarify his perspective. When we're talking full self-realization, we've gone the whole way and we're fully stabilized and we don't fall out anymore. Right? Does that make sense?
Yes, it takes time, as you have rightly said. It takes time, and it's a slower process. It doesn't happen in a moment. As people, there are a lot of people in spirituality who says that it happens in a moment, but in fact, in reality, it does not happen in a moment. It is a process.
Guru Bhaneswaranand, can you share a little bit from the perspective that you were telling us before, that full self-realization is not comparable with these temporary states where we feel self-realized before we have reached that complete and utter and ultimate state of purnatva or enlightenment or self-realization. You were telling to me that these states of bliss that we experienced before are not really what you would call bliss, and that it is not fathomable from a perspective of a non-enlightened person. That's the one aspect of it. And the other aspect of it, if a person undergoes regression therapy, has been helped by a therapist to reach a temporary non-egoic state, afterwards they go home and they fall back into an egoic state, still remembering those experiences. Could there be some damage coming from that? Or could there be a challenge or an issue arising from that fact?
I think yes. When you say that you have reached to a state where no ego is, I think it's not right. There is a little bit of ego at that time, And if even little percentage of ego remains at that time and the I remains, you carry that traumatized experience in your life further, and then definitely in the future there would be difficulty. And if you have really been able to reach to a state where it was all zero, even temporarily, this is also possible that you do not carry these things to the future of your life, then there is nothing wrong. Now, the possibility that it will happen perfect are very rare. And therefore, I still hold an opinion that it is damaging in 90% of the cases.
Okay. Bhaneswaranand, you were telling us that part of opening ourselves for negative energies from other people to come in, you were saying in our last show actually, that a big aspect of that is doing spiritual work or opening ourselves up to emotions or to our emotional body more, feeling others more, maybe doing healing work, maybe doing therapy work. You were saying that there is, usually we have a natural protection shield and nothing can really come into us from the outside. But for people who do a lot of emotional, spiritual energy work, that the chance is higher for negativity to come in, for those protective pathways to break open. Would you say that a regression therapy could be leading to a weakening of our natural protection body for outside influences to enter us that could have a negative effect on us?
I don't think so, because there is no transfer of energy. You are taking the person's mind backwards or forward to the previous life or to the next life, but there is no transfer of energy through the body. And when the transfer of energy takes place, this is the risk in spirituality. That risk is not there at all in Elika's work. But in spirituality, what happens when you get open to the energies? It can be positive energy or negative energy. It is not able to identify that, so you receive both positive as well as negative.
Which is not happening in your work, Elika, I believe. Elika, what do you think? I read a little bit up on this. So there is the regression therapies where people, and I think that's what you're doing, where you're leading the patient to the non-egoic state, and then from there you have them take a look. There is also those kinds of regression therapists that do the work for the patient. I guess they would more be channelers than psychotherapists, but that exists too. It's a whole different arena of regression therapy where the therapist goes back with his or her enhanced intuitive abilities, goes back and looks at an aspect of the person's life or of a past life of the person, and then comes back to tell the tale.
In terms of energy workers that do the work on behalf of the person, I'm sure that it's very helpful for some people, but the reason that I don't work this way is because I think that there's too much of a risk for what in psychology we call projection, right? So I'm actually projecting my own experience of reality and my own subconscious mind and egoic imprints and conditioning onto somebody else. So I think this is risky. I think you would have to be very clear, a very clear channel to do this work successfully. And I've also noticed, and maybe Guruji has a comment on this as well, that the more a person's soul is allowed to do their own journey, their own work, is encouraged to work for their healing, for their spirituality, for their realization, it seems that the more well-being is created in the person. So we're not giving any guidance. Yeah, we can give guidance, but we really want the soul to show up and be doing the work and walking the journey, yeah, with help from God, or with help is okay. But this helps a person if they can have supports to do it for themselves. There's more self-esteem, there's more well-being, there's more connection with the divine.
Okay. Very good. Thank you so much. Guruji, the question came up for me because I was thinking, if somebody goes into that person's past life, the therapist versus the patient, him or herself, would that be a mixing of energy?
Possibly, yes.
So there would be a potential danger for our protection shields to be broken open.
Maybe. You see, when psychologist is taking you somewhere, I think your energy body is not affected, and maybe that your seal is not broken. But possibility exists. It definitely exists.
Okay.
You see, this is when we are doing psychology or spirituality, it is not physics or it is not mathematics where you say 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. You see, human body is the mixture of science and arts. You have got two eyes. I also have two eyes, but our eyes are not same. It is the mixture of science and arts. So you have to understand those perfect rules what you have in physics, in mathematics, in pure sciences, you cannot have in the human sciences. We always try to understand things scientifically, which is not the right thing. We have to understand things both scientifically as well as artistically to heal a person, to find the real problem in the person, and to help him come out of that problem. You understand?
Yes. So it seems like for both of you, the way, what is your goal is to remove the reactive impact of the emotional body. What our emotions can do to us under certain circumstances is make us be non-aware, or make us be just moved into a certain direction, and maybe from our self perspective we wouldn't even want that. And I believe the work of both of you is to remove the impact of those disturbing emotions or reoccurring disturbing emotions in life. Am I correct with that? Could I say that?
I think psychological wise, yes, you are right. I think she will answer that you are right. But spiritual work is not the healing work. Spiritual work is something very different, and it is not what exactly you say. Spiritual work is taking a person and then protecting him and taking him to the enlightenment state, and that is something different
Which
work. Yes,
which is a non-emotional state.
yes, non-emotional state comes little earlier than enlightenment. I mean, to reach enlightenment you need a lot of other things other than emotions.
Okay. And Elika, is a state as a result of a regression also an emotionally freed or non-emotional state, at least in correlation to that aspect that has been dealt with? Is that the same thing in a sense?
So the journey often begins with suffering. The person is suffering, and in the West, if they don't have access to spirituality, if it's a secular society, they go to the therapist. Yeah, they don't go to the church. They go to the therapist. Fix me. What's wrong with me? I'm suffering. Or they go to the doctor and they ask for a pill. If they're lucky, they come to a therapist that understands that they're not their ego. And that's the start of the journey. The disidentification from the ego and the healing, that process helps them to start waking up. And when the waking up starts to happen, the spiritual journey has started. Would you agree, Guruji?
Oh yes, I think you are right. Most of the people reaches psychologist or to a spiritual person, a spiritual leader when they are suffering, and from there the starting point takes place, and we try to make them happy. But fortunately, most of the people who came to me, sometimes I think most of them were not suffering and they wanted a spiritual journey, and I think I was little fortunate in that, and we took straight away from there. But yes, you say it very rightly that the person who has reached to you has got a spiritual potential, and you can take them to spirituality any moment, any further.
So this is an interesting thing you were saying before, and I have my own experience with your teachings and with the path you're teaching or you're taking people on. And one of the things you just said is that when people come to you, you try to make them happy. And this was one thing that I noticed, is that your answers in regards to somebody being on the path, let's say they come to you with certain doubts, or they come to you with certain fears about their path, or they come to you with certain traumas from their past, maybe they're distrusting or whatever it is, that I've seen you kind of like take the charge out of these things by reinstating that everything will be okay, that there is no danger, that you're good. And so I've seen you almost take the opposite route, Guruji, from going back into a trauma. You're trying to stir people away from the trauma, to forget about the trauma, to think about the positive, their happiness, the love in their life, and so on and so on. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? It seems like almost it's like the opposite, the opposite way of the opposite approach in a way.
Yes, I think you're right. It is the whole process is opposite, and when people come very specifically to me, I tell them, "Don't worry." And fortunately, it happens that their worries goes away. But that may not happen with a psychologist, so they have to work and they have to really go deep into it. Most of the times I have seen my experience, I mean, it's a little surprising that somebody made a telephone call from thousands of miles away, and was in a great panic, was almost to commit suicide. And I told him, "Oh, nothing is wrong. Why are you so worried? We are there to take care of you." And believe me, they have not committed suicide. That is something different.
Yes. Yes, and I really appreciate what Guruji is bringing here, because what we find underneath the protectors, where the wounds, where the vulnerability is, where the trauma is these very damaging egoic beliefs. And they are, I am bad, I am wrong, I am not good, I am a failure, I am all of these very negative things. And this is the deepest identification of the ego. I am not worthy. I am not lovable. I am not love. Yeah, the soul has fallen away from who it is, from the true essence of who it is. So whichever way you go about it, whether it's Guruji saying you are good, everything is good, or whether you take them through the journey back to realizing where they started thinking they're not good, so they wake up and see it for themselves, this goes to the same place.
Okay. Okay, well, very good. Thank you. You know, I have one last thing. We're getting to the end of our show, but I have one last thing. And this is also part of my research and of the experiences that I had with regression therapy. From what I understand, on a memory level, the traumas that we experience, they store on a visceral level, right? So they store in the muscles, they store in the organs, they store on the limbic level, which is our emotions, our heart, so to say, right? And they store on a mental cognitive level, right? So, and this, all those three levels, from what I understand, need to be cleared for the effect to be there. I'm just trying to confirm with you that I have the correct view on this.
Yes, you could say that the body, the organs, all of the layers of the being, physical, pranic, mental, emotional, causal, all carry the imprints of karma. They all carry the imprints of experiences in life. But ultimately, and yes, clearing on all of the levels, this purification of all of the levels is very important. But ultimately, the end of this journey is to not identify with the body, not identifying with the mind, and not identifying with the body.
And the emotions, I would assume.
Yes, the mind, the emotions, and the body.
Yes, okay. Now, Guru Bhaneswaranand, my question is, now that we have confirmed that, my last question to you is, what do these levels, the body, the emotional, the emotions, and the mind, or the cognitive level, do these aspects have anything to do with the soul? You were also speaking about the seventh body a lot. Do they have anything to do with the seventh body? What are those? What is the soul? What is the seventh body? Can you explain as a last, maybe a little bit?
Yes, I mean, they have got nothing to do with the soul, as he rightly says. But soul remains in the body. There was some effect, I mean, as long as we are alive, some effect of the body remains on my consciousness too, but in to the large extent, they are two independent things and they are not related, as he says, and they do not affect each other.
So your focus is for to perpetuate the soul, I assume, which means to create an arena where there is emotional calm, where there is no reaction anymore from our body, from our mind, or our emotional body, and that would be the reaching of the soul. Or is that an equivalent? Can I explain it this way? Or
No, it all depends upon for what a person has come to me. If he has somebody has got pain in the leg, I do not go and treat the souls. We try to send him to somebody, some who can treat the legs and transfer the energy at the legs level. I mean, spirituality is a very big thing, as you know, and this topic was different, and this topic and spiritualities are related. I think many other things you have to talk when you talk about spirituality.
so, because Elika was saying that it starts as a psychological or a therapy journey and then it becomes a spiritual journey. So, I wonder from your perspective, where's the connection there between this and the soul?
The starting point can be many. There are 8.4 million approximately starting point from where you can start your spiritual journey. Psychological treatment may be one of that. So, yes, from psychological things, you can start your spiritual journey. You can start from many other places. Those places are different.
And starting the spiritual journey means that you're becoming aware of your soul. Is that
Yes, I mean, becoming aware of soul does not happen in a day. It is the ultimate goal. But yes, something starts happening immediately. The more like my expectation level goes down. I do not expect those lot of things from my wife. If she doesn't give me the breakfast at 8 o'clock, I will not shout at her like the most common people. You understand? I mean, those things starts happening immediately, but realization of soul comes much later.
so? Would you say that a marker for successful therapy, no matter what it is is that a person starts having less expectations into their surroundings. Would you say that this is a
Absolutely.
marker to success?
I think she says absolutely, and that's the correct answer. Not only therapist. If you want to be a good doctor, if you want to be a good mother, good father, good politician, anything good you want to be, if your expectation level are low, definitely you can do a better work.
Elika, please.
Yes, no, I work with couples in relationships as well, and expectations is one one of the big things to drop. Yes, expectations, preferences, judgments, these all cause suffering.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. We are totally at the end of our show. If there is any last words any or both of you would like to say, please, now would be the time. If there's anything you haven't said yet or anything you feel like is missing, please go ahead.
Incorporate spirituality in whatever you do. Have less expectations. Accept the situation and the person as it is if you want to be happy and blissful in life.
Wonderful words we have heard before and beautiful
Thank you.
words.
Thank you.
Elika. You have a few last words for us?
Amen. Much gratitude to you, Guruji, for being part of this discussion, and I've really enjoyed my time here with both of you. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Guru Talks. Share this episode with anyone who wants to be enlightened by Guru Bhaneswaranand, and don't forget to click subscribe.